Let's officially get this started. Hey everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air. This is episode 403. As always, I'm your host, Ever Gonzalez. Now, many of you know that this is the podcast where we interview founders, disruptors, and mavens. Today's episode is no exception. I wanted to introduce you to Leonard Chung. He is the co-founder and CEO of Hello Chava. Leonard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Really great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on board to talk about a lot of different things going on in your world. You have this amazing company that we're going to get to talk about here in just a bit. But I want to paint the picture to our audience here before we really get started. So where are you calling us from right now?
I'm calling from San Francisco, California.
What's obviously San Francisco, right? The mecca for entrepreneurship, for startups, all that good stuff. What are the pros and cons of doing business out of your area right now?
Ooh, great question. I think the pro is that you can get fantastic people, fantastic resources. There's deep history, deep networks. So it's easy to get somebody who is a specialist and you can get them part-time fairly easily. The downside is when you want to hire somebody full-time. At that point, the competition for talent is just so tough, especially when it comes to engineering that. It's very difficult to convince people to come on board and give up a cushy life somewhere else, especially when you've got large companies that are willing to pay a pretty penny across the board.
And so do you still consider yourselves, and again, we'll get into the startup and what it does and how it works. Do you still consider yourselves a startup?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we are early days still. So we've built out the product. We've got several thousand people using it, but you're always a startup until you're not a startup. And that means somebody's bought you or, you've made enough money so that you can afford all of these expensive, engineers and other people.
So you're in that culture, and you've been there for quite a while. You went to school in Northern California, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I actually was originally born in Canada, but moved down here when I was 8 years old. Went to school here, graduated from UC Berkeley. So I've been pretty local other than a few year stint up in Seattle with Microsoft a while back. But otherwise, I've always just been around here.
Well, and every location continues to change, to evolve, right? Good and bad. I'm assuming you've seen it change since the early days when you got out of school.
Absolutely. I think the biggest change was it wasn't cool to be a geek or a nerd. now it's completely flipped. Everybody's in hoodies.
Right.
Yeah, I think that there's something about the fact that innovation and trying to do things that mean that you're taking risks is a bit celebrated here. But on the other hand, I do think that we've perpetuated now a little bit of a story of success in Hollywood and the media about doing tech, which, at the end of the day, because what we do is risky, it means that, I do worry a little bit that as time goes on, we lose track of a bit of the heritage and the history of where we came from, meaning, you're going in and exploring new frontiers and you're probably going to fail, and we should acknowledge and celebrate that.
You've been in the trenches for a little while now. And obviously there in Northern California where kind of it's all happening. Can you spot the true entrepreneurs that are on some and then, from the wantrepreneurs?
Yeah, I'd like to think I can. The biggest thing is you've got to have, an endless well of optimism, but importantly, it's tempered by a pretty good amount of pragmatism, and that's I think the wantrepreneurs, you can have the dream, but if you don't temper it with where you're actually at, and you just go, man, I'm going to take over the world in a year, I go, oh, that's a little tough because you bought into the Hollywood marketing a little too much.
Sure. It's sexy right now, right? Like you mentioned, now it's cool to do these things. Before, it wasn't so much, but now everybody wants to be a tech entrepreneur. Everybody wants to go out to California and make it big. Obviously, some succeed and some don't, right? I mean, it's a tough, sometimes very cutthroat industry. It feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly not as glamorous as, there are days where it's glamorous, but a lot of days not so glamorous.
Okay, well, let's jump right into it. Hello Chava, what is it? How does it work?
So Hello Chava is a product that's rethinking business management for what we call the Fortune 50 million. And really what that means is if you think about the persons we call them the solo professionals, others call them the freelancers, the gig economy worker, but most commonly you'll call them your hairstylist, your personal trainer, the freelance consultant. People who are businesses of one are becoming the majority of workers in the US in the next 2 years. You think about that, that's a bit crazy. And what we've built is effectively a product for these folks, but built purposely for them. So it's a phone number that allows them to add a business line to their personal number. And then by managing the conversations between themselves and their clients, they're able to superpower themselves and manage their business better. So this is things like workflow automations around booking and appointments, doing mass communications with their customers, keeping track of all of that for them so that they don't really have to. And the way we kind of think about it is we're blending in what people would call a CRM, a customer relationship management, that like a large company would have to keep track of who they've been talking to, bookings and appointments, payment systems, all of these things that people who work at large organizations have, but aren't appropriate for the small one because they require habits that you train your employees to do, like every time you finish a client conversation, enter in information about that last meeting. We automate all of that, and using AI, using kind of the latest technology, we basically say, okay, why don't we keep the client notes for you? Why don't we keep track of the appointments and we'll write it to your calendar for you? It's kind of like having a little assistant built in, all recognizing that for these folks, the center of commerce has really all moved into text messaging. So completely different set of needs that are required versus just any sort of existing product that you just try to bolt on.
Okay, so what does that look like, right? So as a solopreneur, I wanted to sign up, right? I go on there, I'm assuming I sign up, and what do I see first? What do I get to do right after that?
Yeah, so the first thing you do is you're downloading an app, and then you pick a phone number, so you choose an area code, and then from there, you can start communicating with your clients. So let's say you and I were interacting. I'd send you a text just like any other. It would look like you don't do anything different. It looks like you've got my phone number to text with. But the difference is now Hello Chava is keeping track of our conversation. So at this point, let's say I offer you some times. I hit a single button. It takes into account what it knows about you, everything that it's built a profile and learned about me, my preferences, everyone else I'm scheduling with. And it picks 3 times that it says, hey, Ever, can you make any of these 3? And if you say yes or no, it'll remember that. And if you say yes, it'll book it into your calendar, confirm it. If you say no, it'll actually remember, okay, it seems like Ever doesn't prefer these times, right? And so over time, through every little what we call micro workflow that's happening, it's learning more and more about each of us, but allowing me to say, okay, next time I try to book something with you, seems like Ever normally prefers times that are, let's say, weekdays in the afternoon. Let's just offer those types of times because, as somebody with good client hands, I would like to make sure I'm also taking into account your preferences. The system learns all of that for us, and it's just all there automatically.
And obviously, the more information, the easier, better it gets to be able to figure out more, right?
That's right.
To learn, not just from me, right, who kind of is working on this, but from my clients as well, which I kind of like. You're in a space that, there's some big boys playing in this, right?
Yeah. We see there's people playing in adjacencies, and I think that's the key thing when it comes to innovation. My last startup was called Syncplicity. It was in the space of file syncing and sharing, and I remember back with cloud computing, people go, "Man, yeah, it seems crowded." And the answer is always, yeah, and you kind of want that, but what you want is your own take, right? Having other people in it is great because it shows there's a need and other people will recognize it. But you don't want them to be doing the exact same thing because obviously then you're dead. So in the case of the cloud, it really was, okay, people have a lot of information and data. Great. But there was a belief with others that the data was never going to leave a corporate firewall. And that was fundamentally different than, the products like Syncplicity, like Dropbox, like Box that came out later. Here with Hello Chava, the distinction is really around two main areas, right? The first is that build not to the employee. So acknowledging that everybody has a need for CRM, for messaging, for a business line. Cool. But the difference is by building to the solo professional, we're saying, look, number one, they don't have the habits that employees typically have. They are not keeping up-to-date calendars. They are not keeping great client notes, right? They might be great personal trainers, but let's not make them be great personal trainer business people. Mm-hmm. Software can fix that. So that's step number one. And any product that assumes they've got these habits, I'll do scheduling for you as long as you keep a perfect calendar, ain't going to work for these guys, right? The second is really the fact that as they're moving their commerce into messaging, that's become the new center of commerce. It's not email. If I'm trying to do something with you and I send you, hey, go register for my website to book an appointment, that's weird, right? I want to be able to just say, hey, can you do 3:00? And I can either respond or offer you new times. I don't want to kick you out of the message stream. So this concept of it should be me conversing with you over messaging, and importantly, I should be a capable version of me. That's super key, right? Not I'm foisting off the problem onto you and then it's your problem.
Your first point I like a lot because, we have 400 plus episodes or so on here, and we've had a lot of successful entrepreneurs, right? Some that have lost it all as well, but and a lot of solopreneurs as well. What I like about what you're trying to do is you're letting them be the best that they can be in whatever talent they have, whether it's personal trainer or whatever else they're doing. And then you're handling this part of it, which is huge, right? I mean, you're going to grow with new clients. And if you screw it up or you don't have it right, or you make it too complicated, which I've seen quite a bit, you're not going to go anywhere. No matter, I don't care how good of a personal trainer you are. You're not going to be able to grow without it.
Yeah, you got it exactly right? The opportunity here, which I think is huge, is for the first time, we've also got the technologies like the AI types of democratized technology that we can bring into all of this that never really was there before, right? Before you had to own a lot of stuff, build a lot of stuff. Now we can say, hey, guess what? We can do messaging via Twilio. We can go pull in, AI technologies that exist elsewhere. We've got some stuff that we've written on our own across the board. We can tie all this together and now give it out to millions versus saying, hey, we're going to build a big data center of proprietary stuff and, put it up in a walled garden.
How big's your team right now?
We're tiny. We're 5 people in total.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a bunch of folks who also are part-time plus advisors. So super lucky that, folks have followed me from previous companies. But, in these early days when you're not making, huge money, you got to stay lean and mean.
It's funny. So you've had some success in your career. You worked at Microsoft for a while. You had an exit with your previous company. Why this? Why now? I mean, it sounds like with what I've been able to read about you and find out about you, obviously very, very capable of doing a lot of different things. Again, why this? Why now?
Yeah, this one was partially it's folks you're working with. I was super lucky to be joined on this journey by my co-founder Zach Choi, who led revenue growth at Green Dot, which was a financial products company. They did those prepaid cards that, for example, Walmart had in there. And we were really going, man, let's do something next. Let's do something big together. And I had just gotten back from traveling. After my last company, I sold it, traveled the world for a year, came back and was basically, just spending time ideating during daytimes. And I realized, man, just like Zach's doing consulting, I'm doing consulting on the side. we don't have tools to help us, right? This kind of sucks. And as we started looking more into the problem, going, why isn't there anything that works for me, right? Started realizing, wait a minute, it's because I've got different needs. When I'm doing this freelance type of gig, it's a bit different. And, I start talking to other friends, family, the personal trainer. I'm realizing they've got the same issue. And so it said, okay, wait a minute. There's a bunch of people with a need. It's unaddressed. That's always step one, right? Getting deep on the problem. But then step two was, is this a trend? Is this on the back of a trend? And that was when the lights really started going, okay, wait a minute, this is getting interesting. When I started seeing the early reports that were coming out, that it wasn't a matter of if, but now a matter of when, that people working for themselves, these businesses of one, were going to be the majority of worker in the US. Suddenly it was like, wait a minute, we've got a huge pool of people and nobody's building to them. And if you want to lead the puck, that's where we're going to be. And yet all the existing stuff doesn't work, right? Just does not work for this audience. And it really reminded me of back in the day with Sync and Share. People didn't get the move to mobile, right? If you could have predicted it, you could have done really well, because back when we were starting, right? It's hard to remember now, but in the period of 2005, 2006, it was CIOs at big companies buying BlackBerries, right? And if you said, hey, it's actually going to be consumers who are going to be buying their own devices for many hundreds of dollars, and therefore will have a different set of requirements and needs, that was, products were not built with that in mind. And so that was really exciting. And then looking at the technology waves, that was when it was like, okay, we got to do something here, right? And the technology waves were suddenly now, Twilio just went IPO relatively recently. You see technology companies like Amazon, providing a gazillion web services and cloud services, all at incremental pricing. Suddenly you could say, hey, this requires a lot of expertise in technology that really, that stack of stuff only came about and only became accessible in the last few years as well. So it wasn't even, nobody's really thought about this and here's the trend, but nobody could have built this before.
Even
and that was when it really got exciting.
Even with the big boys playing in this space right now, you doing this obviously needed, right? It's people are need to get on board, but yeah. It still feels like it's the wild, wild west with this. So does that keep you up at night, or it's wide open for you? You can take it, but there must be some challenges and some stuff that kind of worries you a little bit about that.
Oh, always, right? We're in a risky business at all times, and I think like Andy Grove says, he was CEO over at Intel. Only the paranoid survive, right? Nice. There's always stuff here that at the end of the day, part of the beauty and the curse of building something really innovative is you could do 100 things right, you can do one thing wrong, and it can kill the entire company and product. And so there's, of course, lots of things that I worry about. But I think the key thing is a lot of the big guys view the world, and this is the challenge, right? Having worked at big companies doing innovation before, the challenge is they're generally viewing innovation in structures. At the end of the day, organizations are people. And in big companies, you've split out your people into little groups, right? You own the small, medium business group. You own this group. You own that group. And what that means is that when you have moments like this, where you actually have to rethink things from the ground up, almost take it from first principles and say, but what if the future is fundamentally different from the past? It's very hard for larger organizations to play this game because they can't think that way, right? This is the boundaries of this box of where I'm allowed to think in my business group. And that's why when things like cloud have come about, when things like the move to the iPhone and mobile have come about, large companies that honestly should have been the ones, and on paper you'd expect to be the ones to have dominated the spaces, actually get disrupted by the small ones. And it's because they can't get out of thinking about things in historical terms.
Now we were talking about this a little bit offline. You kind of got started at an early age. So let's talk about that story, and then kind of transition into the role that mentors have had in your life?
Yeah, I was one of those kids that, at an early age realized I was a round, I had a round hole and I was the square peg. So when I was 12, I recall I wanted to go and get into the computer industry more. I'd always been one of those kids that tinkered and played with technology a lot. And when I went and interviewed with some computer companies, they basically were like, well, you could do data entry. That's what we have for 12-year-olds. And I thought, man, that doesn't sound right. And so I went and instead started doing computer consulting, and also created, back in the day, this thing called a bulletin board system. So it was pre-internet, and people had to use modems to dial into a phone number with a server that I maintained at home. And I think one of the things was it really allowed me in some ways to not face some of the realities of, if I went into work as a 12-year-old, of course, people would go, who's this? It's a weird kid. But by conversing with people over an electronic means, right, digitally, people didn't know who I was and I didn't know who they were. And so we were just chatting on ideas, right? And I think that really carried forward for me. Later on, one of the folks who was a fantastic mentor for me and really impacted my career and thinking was a guy named Jim Gray, who basically won the what's called the Turing Award, which is the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. And I had built something called SETI at Home back when I was a freshman with a team of folks at UC Berkeley. And Jim said, you should come and interview with me. And back in the day, there was no LinkedIn. I had no idea who he was. So I wander down there and I interview, and he ends up hiring me on the spot. And later I realize he was looking for someone with a postdoctoral degree. So he was looking for people with PhDs, and I'm a freshman at the time, not even declared in computer science. And Jim, he was literally way up there in the Microsoft hierarchy. And I recall I asked him, I said, Jim, why the heck did you hire me? Right? Like, was that day just a strange day for you, or, what happened here? And he said something to me that I think was such a great lesson, right? And I always appreciate when I learn these leadership lessons that others have passed down as wisdom. And his was, I hired you, Leonard, because A, you are super smart, but lots of people are super smart. And B, you could communicate well, but lots of people can communicate well. But why I really hired you was that when you saw something that you thought I wasn't correct on, and you were right, you spoke up during the interview and you told me I was wrong.
That's huge.
And he said, yeah, exactly, right? Most people don't do that, especially when you get to my, Jim's level. People don't tell you you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's a quality that you're not going to appreciate as much as I do now. But as you get older, just know, never lose that quality of, asking the quote unquote stupid question, or going, hey, I don't think this is right. And saying that to anybody, whether they're, the intern who just got started, or they're somebody who's, the senior vice president of some place, or the president, for heaven's sakes, don't lose that quality, because it's an important one. And I think that for me was so impactful on being a leader, because, innovation itself is such a fragile thing. There are 50 ways that I can tell you right now, any given thing that's brand new could fail. And they're easy to come up with, right? But the reality is innovation doesn't succeed or fail because people throw out, 50 reasons why it should fail. They succeed because you figure out the 5 reasons it should.
Exactly.
It should succeed. And so much of it really is about what I took away from that interaction with Jim, and what really carried forward was the concept of, on the opposite end, on Jim's side and now on my side, is creating safe spaces for people to innovate, safe spaces for people to express their ideas, because at the end of the day, you know, the analogy, like Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb, right? It wasn't when someone said, hey, how did you figure out the one magic way to make the light bulb, the material? Thomas Edison said, I didn't. I just figured out, you know, the 10,000 other ways that didn't work, right? And if you stopped and you said, after 3, Thomas, you're an idiot, or if he did this to his team, you know, what are you guys doing? You've spent so much of my money or so much of the team's money, and you're letting everybody down. You've tried 2,000 methods. They all don't work. What's wrong with you? That would have killed it right then.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about that for a sec. The safe space that you're talking about, easy to understand, right? It would make sense to kind of encourage your team to feel comfortable to kind of take, you know, swing for the fences type of a deal. But when you're the co-founder and CEO and you're burning through some money, and you know these 10,000 tries after a while, you're like, okay, let's figure this out. So how do you implement it? Like, how do you stay true to that statement of safe spaces for your team?
Yeah, I think it starts with something that is also quite simple, which is just being really transparent. At the end of the day, you know, we are a team, and you know, we kind of joke in Chava, we call it, you know, Chavamily, right? And it's this concept that it doesn't matter how junior, senior, whoever you are, we should really be supporting each other. And importantly, that means giving the same data and information. So, you know, coming in and I'll take a case, right? Back when my last company, Syncplicity, in 2008, I just closed the friends and family round in January, and we were just over the moon, right? Our first round of financing. And during the party that we had, I had one of my again good friends, and he's in the land of finance. He comes up to me, he's like, "Hey, I don't want to, you know, make this a bummer for you, but I think there's like a big crash that's happening in the markets sometime this year. So how long do you think you're going to need to raise money?" And you know, I remember I drunk a little bit, and I was like, I don't know, like normally it's 3 months, maybe up to 6. And he goes, well, assuming there's a crash and there's this window is going to close for you know, funding anything, I think, yeah, I would recommend you start tomorrow.
Really?
Right? And I thought to myself, what a bummer, right? Oh my gosh, this is horrible, tough news. He's probably right. He knows more than me, but what tough news. And I think then it creates leadership questions, right? Do I share this with my team, knowing that they've come up on this huge elation of raising funds and we think we're going to take over the world? Or do I tell them and then potentially the next day go, oh, what a bummer, right? We got to get right back to the grindstone. It's going to be a hard, long slog. Or do I just, you know, you do the standard platitudes, okay, everything's great, and just move forward. And I think that for at least me personally, you know, gave everyone the night to digest it while I kind of had to mull on it myself. And then the next morning, I was like, look, here's what I heard. I think he's right. You know, smart people may disagree. And so let me know if, you know, you're seeing other data or hearing other things, but I think we got to get back into this. And it saved the company, right? We were one of the last companies financed with a Series A
really?
In 2008, and we would have died had we not done that. But delivering that type of tough news and passing along that type of raw data is the type of stuff where, you know, you want to make sure that you do in doing innovation, because at the end of the day, most of the successes and failures, while this was an example of data I had, most of the successes and failures that are happening in a company are actually ones that I don't witness. It's the person who's doing it that they realize, oh, yeah, this marketing campaign's not going to work. And you don't want them to then do the same thing. Well, maybe I'll just try another 5 things and not tell anyone, right? You want them to say, hey, look, I tried this. It totally didn't work. I want to try 5 more things. Here's what I'm thinking. Anybody else have any suggestions or ideas?
That's huge, right? Easily you could have kept it to yourself and just kind of pushed along and let everybody enjoy themselves and just get to work. But you have to make the hard decision sometimes. And yeah, it's a bummer, but it looks like obviously you made the right decision. You came out of it on the other side. So congratulations. Now let's switch gears here for just a sec. Let's talk about AI and VR and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
What is this going to lead to? I mean, right? We don't know, but let's take some educated guesses. What is all this going to look like in 5 years?
Yeah, I have a personal. I'll tell you my personal opinion on it, which is I think that there's really two types of impacts that AI is really going to have. The first is the one that a lot of people pay attention to, which is, hey, this may replace certain types of human activities, right? The examples being, if you're trying to look at whether there's a dog in the picture, okay, computers are starting to get really good at that, right? Here's a picture of your mom, right? Perfect. There's a lot of things that AI has already helped us in, and I think people sometimes forget. Autocorrect is a great example, right? Or Google, when it suggests searches to you. These are all forms of AI, and they've replaced human behavior, human activity. The other side, though, which I think gets a little less attention, right, is the augmentation. And this is where augmentation is, it's allowing you to be you. It's still your authentic self, but it's making you better. And this is kind of the example of, I like to think of, what we do, for example, at Chava as similar to like the Iron Man suit, right? It's still Tony Stark inside, but a more capable version of Tony Stark. But it's still AI, right? Jarvis is in there and it's helping out with all sorts of stuff like, hey, I think you're going to run out of fuel soon. You might want to figure out where to land. That same sort of thing, imagine if you had that, right? It's not replacing a human interaction. It's just making it better. And that's where, how many times have you gone into a cocktail party and wished you remembered the name of someone, right? In the case of what we're doing today, in a text message conversation, how well, how much would you like to remember the last 5 times over the previous year, what happened with this individual person, so you could personalize things a little bit more, or have it automatically take into account, oh yeah, actually, let me tell you a little profile on this individual. These are the types of things where I think AI doesn't get as much credit. And I think that what I call practical AI, rather than interaction replacing AI, I think that augmentation is actually going to be much more common than perhaps people today give credence for, because it's not as obvious versus sci-fi films that have always been about the replacement story.
Sure. And that's, I think, where a lot of people are up in arms, and they're scared, right? They don't understand it. We don't know what's going to happen, but a lot of that's exactly what they see. Hey, I'm going to lose my job. These robots are going to do this, some as far as saying that they're going to take over, right? Type of stuff. But that was a really good explanation, right? They're just, for right now, they're helping making our lives better, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes these little tweaks, sometimes a little bit bigger, but you're right. What were we like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? I mean, the world has changed completely. Most of it for the better because of this.
Yeah. One funny thing that I find is how natural it becomes after. And it's not a bad thing, right? Like, I'll give you the example. Right at this point now, I remember the phone numbers of probably my best friend, my mom, my girlfriend. That's about it.
Yeah.
And the reason is because, this cell phone is now the place where it remembers everything else for me. Now, arguably, I'd say, do you actually mind that? In my case, I don't. I go, that's great. I don't have to have the mental burden now of trying to memorize all these people's phone numbers. And in fact, my social network that I keep up with can now be larger. That's a benefit. But I think if you look at it from the fear standpoint, it would be, oh my gosh, this thing has now taken over all of my personal relationships. And if it ever, my iPhone ever went rogue, it could cut me off from people and do horrible things.
Yeah.
That would be like a sci-fi version, right? But I think that there's a balance there, which is we're absolutely rightfully concerned as societies about the things that people are doing with this data, right? Facebook's a great example of things happening in the recent news. Biases in the data sets that we're bringing into AI to train the system to tell us about, should somebody, what is the risk of going back to jail, right? And informing courts with given inmates risk. these are all things where there can be a lot of biases and bad things that happen. And so we should be very much concerned about that. But I think also at the same time, we should also just as similarly acknowledge that there's a lot of benefits where it's not replacing people, but making these interactions better and richer.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be people or humans that either screw this up or don't. I mean,
it always is.
That's right. At the end of the day, we still control what we allow into our lives and into society. And so, I mean, it's going to be an interesting debate as it keeps getting bigger and better and more consuming. But we'll see how it goes. And obviously, you're in the trenches there, and so we're going to continue to look to you to answer some of these questions for us.
Yeah, we're hoping. Obviously, you can tell where we've made our bet, which is I don't want to replace human interaction. I just want to make it really better. And I think that also, thankfully, is where the technology itself is strongest. Bots are just, what's called NLP or natural language processing is still a pretty early days kind of thing, right? No computer today really can fake a great human interaction. Yeah. And so, even looking at it from a business and a product standpoint, I don't want to have a product that only works half the time. You want a product that works 100% of the time or near 100% of the time. And today what that means is computers are much better at remembering things and offering summarization than replacing human interactions.
I love it. So now talking business-wise, company-wise, when we have you back on the show in 3 years, what are we going to be talking about?
I sure hope an IPO.
Yeah, good. That's the goal.
I sure hope an IPO. Yeah.
Okay. Team-wise, what's that going to look like, you think?
Oh, that's always hard. I always think team to me is based off, the needs of the organization. But I think the big thing in my mind, I hope what we say team-wise is going back to, we were able to bring together a set of people from really different backgrounds and enabled them and empowered them to be able to help create this, a fantastic new business and product. Because at the end of the day, we are building something that, while it's within guardrails of things that are known, right? Communications, payments, booking and appointments, we are rethinking it all from the ground up. And what that means is we got to make sure we've got all the right voices around the table. And I sure hope that, in 3 years, as we expand the team, one of the hardest parts is keeping the culture the same.
I like it.
And so I sure hope that, what we're talking about then are lessons learned and, going through it yet again, every time is different, the things that worked for this team.
That's exciting. Congratulations. Now, last couple of questions. Right, where you are now, all the things that you've done in the past, what you're looking forward to in the future. What are you the best at right now?
Oh, that's a great question. What am I the best at? I think the thing that that has always been the thing that has propelled me throughout is curiosity. I am fantastically curious, and that means, sometimes chagrin of friends and family. I'm like, walking on the street and I'll be listening to an audiobook, or if somebody tells me they have an interest in some random topic and they're excited about it, I almost will never go, no, thanks. I always go, man, if they're excited about it, there must be something interesting there and I want to hear about it. And so I think it's been the same strength ever since I was pretty young, but just being really curious and taking advantage of every time somebody gets excited about something, not shutting them down and going, tell me more.
That leads to good things, I think, right? I mean, again, like you mentioned a little bit, there's some family-wise distractions sometimes, or just, things that we need to focus on instead of being curious all the time about everything. But obviously you are where you are because you've been curious, and you showed it from a very young age, right? At 12 years old, what was I doing? I was watching sports and riding my bike, right? Here you were, like, looking for a job, changing the world. So it's people like you that kind of continue to push forward with technology, just life in general. So congratulations for your success.
Yeah, thank you.
For those that are listening that want to get to know you a little bit better, or the company, where can we find you online?
You can go to our website. It's www.hellochava.com. And of course, just, it'd be fantastic if folks want to reach out as well. I'll give you my Chava phone number, my superpowered phone number. It's 815-66-CHAVA. That's 815-66-24282. And feel free to shoot me a text.
I love it. So otherwise, you can go to outliermagazine.co. That's outliermagazine.co. Or outlierhq.com. That's outlierhq.com. First of all, subscribe to our podcast, rate, review it, share with your friends. But there you're going to be able to find links to Chava's website, social media links, obviously connect Leonard. He's doing some amazing things, brought a lot of value to this episode. Leonard, again, we want to wish you much success. Thank you for being on the show. And no doubt that we're going to keep track of you and see where this all ends up.
Sounds fantastic. Ever, this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Outliers, We'll talk to you tomorrow.